traumatic death, self-harm and suicide, and child loss. Many people don't know what happened in this location and the tragedy associated with it, and we want to let you know we recommend this panel for those of appropriate age and the current emotional state to hear these stories. We're not getting into explicit detail, but we will be touching on these things, and we know there's a sensitive topic, so we want to let everyone know. My name is Emily MacArthur. I am the owner of River City Haunted. I am a new ghost tour business to Richmond, seeking to elevate the ghost tour experience. So I'm not just doing walking ghost tours, I'm doing out-of-the-box ghost tours. We're trying to create different experiences and have immersive experiences, live stage shows. I'm trying to do what hasn't been done in Richmond before. I'm an amateur historian. A lot of people think I'm a professional historian, but I've just been doing this for years. I specialize in archival research, and I've done history and genealogy about 16 years. I focus on Richmond history. I'm a public speaker, and River City Haunted also creates custom content for other businesses. We're in talks with a lot of various places right now, but I can't announce anything. I have announced at previous public speaking events, we are in the process of getting approved for ghost tours of Belle Isle. We'd be the first ghost tour company in Richmond to do that. Right now, we're waiting on approval of the city budget. That's where it is right now. And we have a big pitch meeting on Tuesday, but we won't say who that's with. I would like to introduce my co-panelists, Steve Dills and Jay Campbell of Transcend Paranormal.
How's it going, everybody?
Everybody having a good event?
Yeah.
That was sad. That was really sad. How's everybody doing today? Yes. Yeah, I agree. Collectively in this room, we probably get about 3 hours of sleep. So, my name is Steve Dills. I'm the director of Transcend Paranormal. We're a paranormal team that operates here in Central Virginia. We partner with different locations throughout Virginia and surrounding states. And we do a lot of fundraising. We do that through ghost tours, public ghost investigations, lectures, presentations, cons, the whole 9 yards. When we host an event, 100% of the proceeds goes directly to the location that we're working with. So that's money that goes directly into historical preservation and restoration, educational programming, and community outreach. So if you join us on anything, it's for a good cause. I'm also the historian, in quotes, on the TV show The Ghost Finders. And that's because, I don't know why, by the way, I don't know why. If you go and look at like the opening credits, it'll be like, lead investigator, Dan Class, Rob Thompson, spirit medium, Steve Dills, historian. And I'm like, that's lame, thank you. And I'm also one of the co-hosts of the YouTube series Eerie Encounters. And with me is one of my cohorts, Jay.
Hi, my name is Jay Campbell. I've been with Transcend for a few years now. And like Steve said, we do a lot of ghost investigative tours, kind of things you see on YouTube and whatnot. Public tours, again, very importantly, all proceeds that we generate go back to the locations that we're investigating. So we're completely not-for-profit in that standpoint. We just like to see the areas kept in shape and preserved and restored as best they can. So yeah, come on out and support us. Hopefully you have a good time with us.
So, how haunted is Richmond?
That's a loaded question. God, I mean, Richmond is like, to me, one of the most historic cities in the U.S., right? You've got everything from, the second English settlement of the U.S., Henricus, just right down the river. And then you kind of mix in a couple hundred years of recorded history, toss in a couple thousand years of non-recorded history by the natives that were in the area, and all of the bits and bobbles that went along with history, all the good, bad, and ugly, some of which you're going to be covering. And you kind of have a wonderful melting pot of paranormal activity. I think, I've investigated everything from you know, some of like the Bird Theater, the Pump House, to private residences and apartments, and I've seen some pretty weird things. And I'm not talking about the people. Sorry,
Tell
Richard.
that story about the workers in the Churchill Tunnel that you saw.
Oh yeah.
That's always a good one.
Yeah. So one of my I guess most interesting Richmond experiences was outside of all places, and it was not at 2 a.m. Actually, it was at 2 a.m. Never mind. It was not in the bar district. So College Steve decided it would be a great idea to head down to the Churchill train tunnels. Anybody familiar with the Churchill train tunnels? Okay, all three of us. There's one person like half clapping, thank you. I love it. So everybody that is familiar with downtown Richmond probably has seen that one entrance that has a pool in front of it now, and it's gated off and all that sort of fun things, and you can't actually get close anymore. There is the other side of the tunnel, and it's the not safe to access side of the tunnel. So it was probably 1 a.m. I was in college. Don't ask questions. And me and two of my buddies decided, you know what better thing to do on a Friday night at 1 a.m. than to go and find the other side of the train tunnels. So we trekked down there. We parked in a very, very sketchy area, and made our way through this thicket to the other entrance of the train tunnel. And by finding it, we actually somehow ended up on top of it, and we're about a foot away from just eating it and falling right on over and in, which was a blast, right? Because, like, imagine, we weren't even walking around with our flashlights. We were very, very smart at this point. And so we get up there to the top of this tunnel, and all of a sudden we hear talking. And I'm like, oh my God, we're dead. This is how I die. Out in the middle of like this weird wooded area in Richmond City. This is it. And so we decide what better to do than to just lay down flat on the ground for like 45 minutes. And during that time, we hear like talking getting louder and louder and louder. And then we see this lantern. It was very weird. It wasn't a flashlight. It was a lantern, like somebody was holding it like this, walking down the tracks, approaching us. And we couldn't see who it was, but we could make out with just that little bit of light that there was this silhouette of a couple of people, like in a group, walking along the old tracks. Okay. And it just kept moving towards us. And I'm like, this is it. I'm dead now. And so we just decide we're gonna just wait it out. They get super close. I'm talking like they're about to make their way around whatever this brush is in the middle of the track, and all of a sudden the light goes out, and I'm like, oh good, we've been spotted. So we'll give it about 10 minutes and then we'll die. And so we sit there for maybe another 20 minutes or so, dead silent, nobody, nothing, and that was it. Nobody had, like, we watched, we looked at this bush where these people would have like come around the other side, and then we would have seen everybody. There was not a single person there. We didn't hear anyone talking. We didn't see the lantern any longer. We saw nobody. And so eventually we made our way down, you know, being smart, made our way down to the tunnel, and we kind of scattered out a little bit. We couldn't go in because it's pretty waterlogged in there, and I wouldn't recommend it because there's a whole cave-in story around that with, you know, a train and a bunch of people still buried in there.
Before they built the wall, like halfway in there?
No, the wall was there already.
Okay.
And we heard, like, it sounded like there was a woman down in the tunnel. However, I was already pretty sketched out, and I also didn't want to get wet, so we were like, you'll be fine, you do you, boo. And we checked back up, and that was a very, very interesting experience, because I don't think I've ever felt closer to death than just watching these folks approach and not knowing what was going on. So that's my pump house story, or my train story.
Jay, I'm friends with you and your wife, Pam. You guys actually live near Cold Harbor Battlefield, don't you? I heard you live very close to it.
Very close. We're at the northern portion of where the skirmish took place for the Civil War, and that whole stretch of area is particularly, I would say, very bloody as far as battles are concerned. One of the statistics I've heard is that the skirmishes there are actually more deadly than per capita than in Gettysburg itself.
So I looked it up, it was over 2,000 dead.
Yes.
No, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Over in that small 6-mile stretch of a battlefield that extends from the battlefield Cold Harbor and goes northward up to 360 Mechanicsville. So yeah, it's incredibly sad, unfortunately, with all the loss of life in that area. But it's part of our history and part of what makes us an interesting area of the entire United States to visit.
So let's talk about the pump house. I know there's a lot of people coming to this convention from all over, so we'd love to have you. Welcome to our beautiful city. The pump house is in a section of Bird Park. It is a beautiful scenic area. It has trails down by the river. It's sort of near a beach. It's a bit of a hike down there, but it's a really nice beach. And a boat launch ramp for public kayak and canoe access that not a lot of people know about, but RV Paddle Sports does want you to know about that. My company did our first ghost tour last October, fairly new to the city. I was the one who led the Dark Waters tour. We do that in partnership with RV Paddle Sports, which is a kayak company in Richmond, and we go down the canal on kayaks and talk about haunted stories of the canal. And it is like, we do this at night, and it's like there's no lights down there, and it's absolutely terrifying. And in that season, like the fog is coming off the water, it is absolutely terrifying. I keep thinking I'm gonna see something like Appers. Drownings in the canal is also something that I've researched very heavily, so I always get scared. Pump house is so creepy at night. It's just like looming out of the dark. And there's no lights down there. There's a security light on the front of the door, which I imagine is horrifying when it flashes on at people when they aren't expecting it. There were a couple of times I did see that light trip when there was no one down there at night. So that's a common thing that happens there. Steve, you said that you had heard of people dying in and around this area before I told you about my research. What had you heard about that?
I mean, a lot of what I heard leading up to our investigation, because we've been to the pump house to investigate, twice now, Jay?
Yes, twice.
And a lot of it was kind of conjecture, just, hearsay from other folks. I know, Tiffany, I think you had shared a story that you and Rhonda had researched, and Tiffany's one of our team members as well. And I think the biggest thing that we heard of is folks falling in either on purpose or accidentally and drowning right there in the water. To be fair, this is the James, and I grew up being told never swim in the James. You might get an extra arm. So there's tons of stories of folks, bodies being found in the water. However, these tended to be kind of more towards the lock area, which is where the pump house sits. And it was very awkward. I mean, it's such a, it is kind of an isolated little piece of Richmond. Very beautiful too. If you ever have the opportunity to head down there, it's an absolutely wonderful spot to go for a quick hike, and just catch some views of the river. But it's such an interesting and stark contrast, going down and taking your family and checking it out and saying, man, this is beautiful, and then realizing that not just the one or two deaths that we found out about at the very beginning of our research, but you kind of uncovered quite a substantial amount more. And I think that's where that leads us into our continued curiosity in the building.
So the pump house was built in 1885, and it was a water pump station connected to two reservoirs: the Bird Park Reservoir, which is still in use today, and the Marshall Reservoir, formerly in Hollywood Cemetery. This is a map from 1876 showing the reservoir. This was before Bird Park was established as a park. You can see the Marshall Reservoir off to the, it's to the right on my screen. So this system made up the Richmond Waterworks and supplied the city's drinking water. And this presentation largely covers the pump house and Bird Park. So this is a map of the current area, Google map. That brown part is the reservoir, is currently under construction. It is still a city drinking water reservoir to this day. And I was actually telling my friend about this presentation. I was like, people died in that reservoir, right? And she's like, oh, I hope they cleaned it.
Nope.
It did have annual cleanings, but apparently, I don't know if it's had enough, but yeah, that's what happened in that reservoir. You can see the Bird Park. It's not really a great screen cap, but you can see the Bird Park pump house down at the bottom of Bird Park. You can see the reservoir driving into Bird Park. It has a fence around it. This is obviously like city property, and you can't access anything there. So I want to give a major shout out to historian Elisha Rakima. He had done a lot of this research for his podcast, Elisha's Eerie History, which talks about creepy stories from Virginia. He's also a history lecturer, and he had actually given this information to a nonprofit group called Friends of the Pump House, to a group of historians and fundraisers dedicated to restoring the pump house. And I actually got Elisha's research from them. To the date of writing, Elisha and I have together located 18 deaths in the pump house and Bird Park Reservoir area in archival records, with only one from natural causes, and I actually don't have enough information to say whether it was natural causes. Weren't really a lot of details on that one. It is extremely unusual for so many tragic deaths in one location. It seems very weird to me, especially since a lot of them are suicides. Let's talk about paranormal activity in the pump house and primarily intelligent versus residual hauntings. You guys want to go on that?
Sure. So
I like the random clapping. Also, by the way, we're totally open for this to be a discussion, so if you guys have questions or want to get involved and get engaged, please feel free to ask questions. Randomly clap, that's always a morale booster, so that's good too. Soft objects being thrown are okay also. Okay, Jay, back to you.
Sure. So we were invited to investigate at the pump house, and it was quite the experience. None of us really had much background going in. We suspected maybe one death there during the construction of it, but that's kind of, I think that was all we really had to go on. Definitely walking into the initial building from the outside and into the newer part of it, it did have a feeling of an unease walking in the door. And we did spend a little bit of time getting a little bit of the history in the background. It is broken up into multiple sections on the inside. The original part being the water part of the pump house. And then later on, it was built out when electricity was coming into the area, and they added the steam room and the generation room, with the generation room being the largest area in the pump house below the ballroom. We decided to set up various pieces of equipment, one including just a camera that was set up in the steam room, I want to say it was, looking up at the second floor window where the ballroom is now. And everybody kept saying the same thing. Something just feels a little off about that whole area that we were looking up into the second floor. So we positioned a camera and just left it running the entire time, looking at an open window on the inside of the infrastructure, just to see what might be captured, going on. And it turned out that when we were reviewing footage later on, we saw very odd shadow movement coming from the second floor before any of us had gotten up there to even look around and see what was the ballroom and the other surrounding offices and rooms were upstairs. Obviously some of it I think may have been artifacting, but there were definite signs of something moving up there that we didn't anticipate finding. As we did start investigating the lower parts of the pump house, we set up things like REM pod, theremin, like the little gadget on the table in front of me. We received all kinds of, we would ask questions to the air, trying to find out, is anybody here? Were you associated with the construction? Different questions. This is like a typical investigation that we do for the public. And we got what we thought, what felt like maybe intelligent responses. This includes using some of the things that you see probably on TV, on YouTube, like Magnlight off on for yes/no responses. We also had, I remember there was, we did some SD sessions and some EVP, which is electric voice phenomenon. I don't remember if anything was actually caught on a recording as of yet, but I know during the SD session we did get some very specific feedback that did correspond to some of the historical records that we had known going in, and I'll let Steve touch on a little bit more of that. I would say the most interesting one are when we finally did make it up to the ballroom area on the second floor. We had a combination of like the music box that was down there pointed at the stairwell with nobody on it. It kept tripping during our time upstairs in the ballroom, going off periodically. Again, I had another one of these theremin devices sitting up there. And every time I tried to walk away from the theremin and turn back to the group in the middle of the ballroom, the thing would go off. And I'm like, okay, I know you're here, thank you. And turn it back around. It did this at least a dozen times in succession. And to the point that I finally had to say, well, sorry, but we have to cut you off because we want to actually do more investigation work in the ballroom. One of the things that we did find, the entire pump house was used regularly up until the very early 1920s. So as part of the trigger objects and sounds, we actually did play some music from the period between the 1910s and 1920s, just to see what kind of reaction that we would get. And lo and behold, we actually did get positive reaction to the music that was played. Things from, again, flashlights coming on and off that acknowledged, hey, we like, they seemed to like the music that we were playing. It resonated with maybe something that was there that was trying to communicate with us. So we took that as positive responses going forward. And it definitely seems to have some history that we'd like to continue exploring as part of our research. Steve, you can tell about, because we split up in a couple groups, and Steve was with another group that I was in, so.
Yeah, a lot of the same stuff for us, just the Estes method session. How many folks have watched paranormal TV shows, just out of curiosity, show of hands? Okay, so a good chunk. So when we say some of these terms, it's not Greek. Okay. We do have some equipment up here too, so as we're talking about some of these things, afterwards, you're more than welcome to come and check them out. But I think from my perspective, the interesting thing is the history around the building in relation to some of the things that we were getting on the music side. Looking back at the history of the pump house, it wasn't just a pump house. It was a place, weirdly enough, for the Richmond elite to gather. And it was very socialite-esque kind of environment. The second floor is this open ballroom that's overlooking the river. And at this time, the Richmond socialites would travel to the pump house in any sort of method. That might be taking a boat to show up, horse and carriage, whichever way to look like you've got money is the way that they wanted to arrive. And there is very little documentation around the parties and balls and ongoings that occurred during these parties. Most of what you find kind of allude to the fact that they were fairly risque, and there was a lot of very interesting things going on at this party that you typically wouldn't write home to your mother about. Yeah, go for it.
I've seen mentions of these balls and stuff in old newspapers, and it was primarily like social events like the Rotary Club or the Freemasons or like fancy dinners and stuff like that. I didn't see anything about risque activity, but maybe I need to look harder. So
Yeah, there's one of the gentlemen that we talked to when we were investigating there had mentioned it, that, you know, they'd use it for all sorts of functions, and it's open today. I mean, like, not right today, but in general, you can actually go and take tours of it now, whereas you couldn't in last year alone. And they just started having it available for parties and rentals. So it's definitely, you know, the really neat thing is they're trying to reestablish the building as a place for Richmond to gather, and to bring that history back, which is, to me, the most exciting part about it.
So, unfortunately, we've been having problems with Wi-Fi here in the convention center. I need to address that because I'm going to play audio from my phone into the microphone. It's the only way I could figure out how to do this. And I did test it before. They said they could hear it in the back. So, I was actually contacted to contribute research to a podcast. It was the first time I've been contacted for one, and I was super excited. Made me feel like a really good historian. Basically, I was doing the Dark Waters tour at this time, and I was posting about it, and I believe they contacted me on Instagram. This is a podcast called Otherworld. I had never heard of it before. Apparently, it's a really popular podcast because I've actually met a lot of people who've heard this episode who have like told me about it. So I'm going to introduce this podcast. This is an episode called The Pump House, about a sighting in the pump house. This podcast describes someone seeing a ghost at the pump house, which was verified by a medium, and a researcher found a true story. They gave me permission to play this, so the first section of audio I'm going to play is Emma and Michael describing Michael's experience. I have this queued up already.
He's a musician, and I don't know, he's just a one-of-a-kind person. I feel like there's not too many people like him. So yeah, one day I was just at this park, and I ran into Michael there. We just started talking as we normally would, and I think we sat down with each other for a while and had a conversation. We started talking about the paranormal, and I had asked him if he had any experiences with that, and he did tell me a couple of stories that were more mild experiences, but his tone kind of shifted at a point, and he sort of said, like, you know, it's interesting you asked me that, though, because I've recently had an extremely disturbing experience, an encounter with the paranormal. And I wanted to ask him about it, but I also could tell that, honestly, he was visibly disturbed and seemed pretty uncomfortable to talk about it. And so him and Taylor started walking along this nature path that goes by this building. And at that point, he said he started to see shadows in the trees. I do remember that he said it was broad daylight, which kind of makes that more creepy. But at that point, he was so freaked out and needed to leave. And so he told Taylor that, and they start walking back up the hill towards this road that goes by the building. He said that as they were walking back, there was a moment where he felt like he needed to look behind him, like he needed to turn his head over his shoulder and just see whatever was behind him. And he did that, and he said that there was a woman standing there between the water and where he was. He said that she was wearing a dress and had shadows in the trees. I do remember that he said it was broad daylight, which kind of makes
Sorry, it seems to be skipping a little bit.
But at that point, he was so freaked out and needed to leave, and so he told Taylor that, and they start walking back up the hill towards this road that goes by the building. He said that as they were walking back, there was a moment where he felt like he needed to look behind him, like he needed to turn his head over his shoulder and just see whatever was behind him. And he did that, and he said that there was a woman standing there between the water and where he was. He said that she was wearing a dress and had like stringy long hair, and he said that she was wet, visibly wet, and she was just looking at him. From what I remember, he didn't say that it was a transparent image or anything like that. He said that it looked like just a fully formed person standing there, which honestly is kind of wild because it's just such a loud image of horror that I guess I didn't know what to make of it at first. I was just kind of shocked and didn't know what to say other than like, oh my god, I'm so sorry that this happened to you, because that sounds extremely disturbing.
So, my name's Michael White. I'm 26. This one specific time that this happened, I was with a friend. She was walking with me. We went down to the pump house. There's these wooden railings that go down to it right next to the actual pump house. And as I was getting closer, I was just getting so scared. And I didn't know why. My friend was like, we should just not walk here. We should just go back. So we left and walked up to this park that's right next to it. And I was up the hill from the pump house. I looked over from the forest. I saw this girl had long black hair and looked like she was drenched in water and was looking at me like she needed something from me. She needed help. It's clear that she had come up and almost followed me back from the pump house up and walked through
So,
the forest.
that is like something straight out of a horror movie. Have you guys ever, Jay, actually, you said you'd heard that story from someone before.
Actually, I think it might have been you, to be honest.
Okay. Have you ever heard of anybody seeing apparitions like that down there?
I mean, I've definitely heard things over the years. I know, we weren't even the first paranormal team to investigate the pump house. So there's, there were other folks that had been in there prior. One gentleman in particular that ended up on a live episode of Ghost Hunters that went abysmally south, which was fun. However, it does, it does still ring true that other people over time, decades, have experienced preternatural activity at the pump house. Why else would they, seek to try to investigate this building if they hadn't? So it doesn't surprise me, especially knowing the history of the James and all of the folks that have, been on that water.
So the next part I'm going to play is Emma telling the medium about the apparition and Annie insisting that they go to the pump house right now so she can read and find out what she felt before hearing the story.
Energy, it just, I was nervous. But I was also so overtaken by my curiosity to try to figure out what could be true, what could be possible. And so it was all of that. So we agreed to go there, and I think we were just both excited. I think I was more nervous than she was. The energy was just jittery and I don't know, the world just felt kind of magical that night in a lot of ways, and scary also, but also so beautiful. Just the possibility of just feeling close to a completely different way of thinking about everything in the world. It was just funny too, because it was like storming outside. It was late. It was probably 10:30 at night or something. And, we had just had like a couple of drinks and we were just all riled up, and it just felt like such a scene out of a movie, literally, to decide to go to this, like, just slightly off the beaten path kind of place and try to talk to a ghost. But we did, and so, we pull up, or at least we start pulling up, and I kind of start to notice that Annie is, like, entering a sort of reading state. It's almost like watching someone become, like, distracted by something. I guess I feel like the best way I can describe her when she's reading is sort of like someone with a huge amount of information all around them that's sort of flowing or like cycling through their consciousness, similar to maybe like scrubbing through stations on a radio. You'll get just pieces and bits of information, but it doesn't form one complete thought, but you can grasp at little bits of it. I guess it's sort of like watching someone trying to grasp at pieces of that flow of information as it's moving through them in a way. And for Annie, at least, I think that there's a lot of like repetition of phrases or words or feelings that come to her, whether they're like emotional or even physical sensations as well.
My name is Annie, and I'm 29. I am from Savannah, Georgia, and I moved to Richmond, Virginia about 2.5 years ago. When I am conversing, for lack of a better term, with a spirit in this manner, it's not like a clear conversation. It's not like a clear cut, hey, how are you today? I'm good, how are you? It's not like it doesn't work that way. The communication is way more pieced together, and it's a lot of feelings and impressions and emotions. It's almost like when somebody's telling you a story and you create the imagery in your head, right, of like what's happening. So it's sort of like that, or like you're reading a book and like you're kind of filling in the blanks in your head or something.
So it becomes apparent quickly that Annie's immediately sort of like kind of slightly overwhelmed by, I guess, the amount of like energy that was coming from this area. She just made it almost a joke of like, okay, like there's a lot going on. Like there's a lot going on over here right now. Like I gotta take a second. I gotta kind of like acclimate into this. And so she's doing that, and honestly, almost immediately there were like several different things that started to come to her, and there's like a lot of movement coming from above, and she starts pointing above her, and she's just making this circle with her hands, and then she's like, okay, now there's this guy, and he's doing work or something. He's like wearing overalls, and he has a bucket or some tools, and he's like moving from here to here, here to here, and she's kind of like gesturing back and forth, and he's picking something up from over there, and he's bringing it over here, and he's doing it a bunch of times. It wasn't immediately, related to the thing that Michael had told me, but I was just there for the ride and kind of just enjoying hearing like these images that were coming to her, and didn't really know what to make of it at first, but was interested. And then after a second, her energy sort of starts to shift, and kind of like I started watching her become distracted by something, or like, there was something there that was really starting to command her attention. Her tone kind of shifts, and she's like, there's something else here. There's like a woman here. She's like, why would there be a woman here? Hold up. And so she kind of starts going into that. It seemed like whatever it was that was stepping forward was, like I said, commanding a lot of her attention, and had like a really strong, kind of demanding energy.
At one point, I went down a staircase, and this staircase is like up next to the pump house, like touching the exterior of the actual building. And when I did, I felt that I was approached by a female who was pretty frantic, and her energy was kind of all over the place, which is a little alarming. Think about it as if you were walking down the street and somebody sort of like ran up to you and is looking at you and you don't know them, and so that's what happened. I'm like, hold up, what is this? And she was wet. Her hair was like dripping, and she was in a sort of long gown. I always joke, it's always a lady in a long gown, but that's what it was, that's what happened. And I tried to calm her down, and I'm like, what's going on? She had come from the body of water that is right there. I suppose it's maybe a man-made canal, but she came from this body of water, and she ends up telling me about how she was put there.
At the first mention of like, there's a woman here, I'm already a little like, oh wow, okay, could be a coincidence, whatever. But then she continues, and then she's like, there's definitely a young woman here, and her energy is really frantic and desperate almost. She's extremely upset about something. They did it to me was a phrase that kept coming into her mind and her consciousness, I think, as she was reading. She was like, they did it to me, they threw me in the water. They did it to me, they threw me in the water. At the mention of that, I like gasped so so intensely, because I think that was genuinely like one of the most genuine feelings of like shock I've had in my life. Before, it could have been like, oh, well, maybe this was someone who committed suicide or something, but like they did it to me. Like, was this woman harmed? I don't know. I was trying to like make sense of all this in that moment, but the overarching feeling, I guess, was just shock that this had come up in such a specific way. Then there were like these physical sensations that started to come through to her, and Annie starts to go like, okay, so I'm like getting this sensation of pressure on this part of my head, and she kind of like puts her hand on her head and sort of is knocking at her skull, and she's like, it's like pressure here, or like it's almost like someone took a blow to my head here, or like there's just this pressure on my head. And she also started to feel this, she said that she was like feeling this fullness over her stomach area too, like this roundness or something. She was like, it's sort of like, it's like a pregnancy, like that's what it feels like. It feels like a pregnant stomach, or just this feeling of fullness around her stomach area. And she was like, this is a young woman who is like in distress, and she was still kind of trying to figure this all out.
I did get the impression that she may have been pregnant. I was like touching my stomach.
So, basically, they contacted me for an interview for historical research. Now, I seem to recall they actually had the story already, but the story aligns with the story of Lillian Madison. I tell this story in my Dark Waters tour, and the story of Lillian Madison is a famous unsolved death from Richmond. Apparently, like, it's there's a historical fiction novel about it, and there's a bunch of podcasts talking about this. This is like a famous true crime story from the city from 1885. And it really depends on how deeply you research this. I've deeply researched the story very much. Lillian Madison was 23 years old. She was from Bath County, and she was employed as a teacher. She had grown up with an abusive family, and her aunt took pity on her and let her move in with her. There she fell in love with her cousin Thomas, and this was not uncommon to the South in the 1800s. It was a pretty normalized thing. I tell people, like my great-grandparents were first cousins. They had the same last name. Again, Southern families in the 1800s. So she was at one point engaged to Thomas, and he broke off the engagement. Apparently, like, he cheated on her with someone else. And, so she was employed as a teacher in Bath County, and she told her employer that she was going to visit family. And she had told this family not to tell her parents where she was. She didn't want her parents to know where she was. She actually went to Richmond on the train. The train conductor testified in the trial and said that she told him that she wished the train would crash and kill her. She was known to be suicidal. She had written letters to her friends talking about how in despair she was. The last night she was seen, she was checked into a hotel in Richmond, used the men's entrance and checked in under a fake name. She was last seen leaving her hotel room with a man, and when she had not returned by midnight, the hotel ordered a search for her. The body of a woman was found in the Bird Park Reservoir several days later. After several days, it was identified as Lily Madison. Lily Madison was last seen at the reservoir with her cousin Thomas. He was identified as the man who's seen with her at the hotel. He was accused of killing her on basically no evidence. I've heard this described as circumstantial evidence. They assumed because he was a man with a woman there late at night and she was dead in the reservoir that he must have done this. And again, there was really no evidence to support this, but he was charged with her murder. This was a huge sensational trial in Richmond. There are details that on the day of the trial, like thousands of people swarmed the courthouse just to try and catch a glimpse of him. There were people selling photos of them in local newspapers, trying to make a quick buck off this. Thomas was actually convicted and sentenced to hang, again, on no evidence. On death row, he has to be pardoned. He testified that Lillian jumped and he tried to stop her, and that was how the fence got broken. That was how his pocket watch got broken, because there was a fence and he was trying to pull her back from jumping over the fence. He claimed that she jumped. They didn't let him off. They hanged him anyway. This is still an unsolved death in Richmond. It is hotly debated by historians to this day. The Friends of the Pump House people think that Thomas did it. I was talking to them down there. So that's the story of Lily Madison. That's the story that they came up with to align with this apparition. It aligns very much. Lillian Madison was 8 months pregnant at the time that her body was found. She was not married, and in this time, it was reported in newspapers that if it found out she was pregnant out of wedlock, this would be very scandalous. In that era, it would have ruined her life, because people wouldn't want to hang out with her, and she had no chance of getting married at all. So that was the story of Lillian. It's a very tragic one. So that's what they think this apparition was. I personally think that Lillian is there. I personally feel her being there. There was also the story of Maurice Broaddus. These news reports are from December 6th and 7th of 1902. He was a second-year student at Richmond College, which is now the University of Richmond. This was at the former location at Columbia House. This is not the coffee. Columbia House is a historic house owned by the Haxel family. If you're from Richmond, you might know the Haxel Canal. So the Haxel family made a fortune in flour milling. Columbia was owned by the grandfather Philip. The Bully Haxel mansion is the grandson. So at the time, the Richmond College was housed in that entire building. And speaking of the Civil War, it was a Civil War hospital also. It's currently on the campus of VCU. He was last seen leaving his apartment at Greece Street and Arthur Ashe Boulevard, going to class Monday morning. He was found on Wednesday afternoon, dead in the woods near the pump house. The coroner ruled the death unknown because it had very mysterious details. So I'm sure we have some true crime fans in the audience, so everybody put your hats on. So no one saw this man for 2 days, and the coroner was positive he'd only been dead for 6 hours. He was known to be addicted to chloroform, which at this time was a surgical anesthesia and an inhalant. It was discontinued as a surgical tool because it was found to be harmful and even fatal. This was causing tensions with him and his roommate. He was found face down in his hat. It had 2 handkerchiefs in it, which were thought to be soaked in chloroform. One bottle was 5 feet from him, and one was 20 feet away. His hands were over his head, and his coat was laid over his back as if placed there after he laid down, which they thought was a really weird detail, because he couldn't have put it there if he was dead already. His school books were out of their strap and were lying next to him. The bottles had labels from a local pharmacist who was questioned, and he said this was a drug he was not required to log who purchased it. And he remembered selling it to someone and noted it was the same bottle, but he didn't remember who, and he had not seen anyone by Maurice's description. His father was devastated and convinced that his son was murdered. The questions about this were really weird. Like, where had he been for 2.5 days? Was he carrying his school books with him the whole time? That's also a weird detail. Was he murdered, and was it connected to a mysterious woman he had allegedly been with during his absence, the 2 days that he went missing? There's no details on her or what her deal was. And did he commit suicide, and if so, how are the other details connected? By the next day, it was reported the coroner thought he had accidentally overdosed, but it still did not explain the mysterious details. This was never solved, and we never hear from it again in the newspapers. So that's a weird one. We have another one. Lula Harper had only been in Richmond for 2 months in May of 1904. In March, she wrote letters to several men at the Soldiers' Home. This was a recovery and retirement home for Confederate veterans located at the current VMFA. By the way, I've heard the VMFA property is extremely haunted. Lula was on a mission to find herself a husband. This was an era where it was socially unacceptable for women of a certain age to not be married, and she was described as nearing middle age, which was basically a death sentence to Victorian women. They didn't want that. Social status was always also very important, and unfortunately, the Confederate veterans were celebrated in Richmond for many years after the war. They had very prominent social status in the city. A man did reply to Lula's letter, and after writing him a bit, she agreed to come. Her own life. He then on the bench by the bird park. I went to VIP to their live show, and I get to meet them, and I cried. I was very excited.
They're awesome.
I love them. So the SS method was actually created by people who are members of their production team now. Connor Randall and Carl Pfeiffer were previously paranormal investigators at the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado, which is where the name comes from. They developed this, documented in their original documentary series, Spirits of the Stanley, and it is used across the board today. Greg Newkirk describes this as technologically assisted mediumship. It is essentially where you'd be listening to a spirit box in headphones. You have a blindfold on. It's a form of sensory deprivation to make you tune in better. And I've done this before and gone into very deep trance states. It does induce a trance state. It's part of the connection process. And I also want to add that I did pay to go on your ghost hunt at the pump house, and it was awesome. I wanted to mention that, Steve, you were in the SS method. There were a bunch of people around you asking you questions. I'm the historian of the group, so I'm like calling out the names of the people documented dying there. I said, is Gilbert Keller here? You said yes. I said, Gilbert Keller, and you said, I am here. And I thought that was really cool. So Gilbert Keller dropped out of the pump house sometime around May 1st, 1910, The exact date is unknown. We just have that from a newspaper dated that. He was a worker and was washing the windows up on a ladder. Bird Park immediately thought someone had drowned in the reservoir in order to search and draining of the water, which took 3 or 4 days at this time. The day of her disappearance, she left early in the morning, told her husband she was going for a car ride, and he gave her some money. She was last seen by a neighbor up on the corner. I'm gonna skip ahead for time. She was missing for several days. I'm just gonna sum this up. She was missing for several days. It was determined there were details like she was depressed. People thought she was not happy in her life. Jeanette Brown was also another person found dead in the reservoir. She had taken her own life. It was determined by the coroner. We're about to hit our hour mark. Are you guys okay with keep it going? Because I'm still in this presentation. Is the audience ready to keep going? Okay. So, for many years, when the reservoir froze in the winter, it was a popular ice skating rink, and they actually had speed skating races and awarded medals to the winners. The races were a huge attraction at the amusement park that was in Bird Park. This was called Idlewood Park later. In the early 1900s, and the winning times were these went skating together. It sounds very idyllic, very picturesque 1905 Richmond. One of these skating nights was January 16th, 1905, shortly after 9 p.m. It was a glorious night on the ice and everyone was having a good time. It was estimated that 100 people were skating on the lake when the ice began to crack beneath the skaters' blades. Instantly, the ice caved and people plunged into the frigid water. Panic ensued, and the bliss turned to screaming. One man risked his life to save them. He got a rope and edged toward the crack to throw it to the struggling people when he too went in. Someone extended a ladder across the ice and he grabbed on, but it may have been too late. He was pulled out of icy water, not breathing. Through a miracle of his rescuers, he was brought back and taken home alive. It was reported that he woke up screaming for a rope, and he was saying, "I will save them," as he woke up from his delirium. When the first man fell through the ice, his friend tried to save him, and both of them drowned. People grabbed wooden boards and rushed to get boats out of the boathouse to paddle out to them. Sadly, some could not be reached in time, and soon the police, ambulances, and doctors swarmed the scene to assist. In total, 3 bodies were recovered. It was reported 6 went under, but the search failed to find more. Do you guys want to hear the craziest part of the story? Some pretty outrageous stuff in these historical accounts. So, the nearest phone was a payphone at the restaurant, and the operator would not connect them to EMS unless they paid a nickel. This was 1905. They were screaming into the phone that people were dying, and they still refused. Someone got in hold of the mayor of Richmond, and he went down there and raised hell until they gave in. The next day, he called Bell Telephone and got into a huge argument with their management. They still refused to waive the payment, and he just blasted them in the newspaper. So that's really all you can do at this moment. Let's again talk about lost spirits of the pump house. So, on this ghost hunt, we were encountering, at least through several Estes Method sessions, I felt that we were encountering we were getting comments through the Estes method about lost, stuck, need help, drowning. Didn't you tell the story about someone saying oops in a splash of water? Can you recall that for me?
Yeah, I think that was on was it the private investigation that we were on, Jay? It was, so we were in one of those first two rooms. I think it was I want to say it was like the boiler room. And it was one of the very few EVPs that we recorded, Jay.
Right.
And we were mid-conversation. A lot of times when we get EVPs, it's not sitting there asking questions. Like we're not trying to interrogate and be like, how old are you? What's your name? What's your favorite food? Things like, you're like, well, that's weird, I'm not gonna answer that. But we were just having a conversation about the fact that people had drowned right there at the pump house. And it just so happened around that same time. And so let me backtrack a little bit. The pump house is widely accessible and open. There are doors, and it is private property, so please do not try to go trampling through there. However, a lot of the original piping, which is massive. I mean, there's some pipes that are about as wide as this table is, and they just lead right outside, and some of those lead right down to the water. And as we were talking about the fact that a number of folks had drowned, and we had read a number of newspaper articles about it, we heard this splash in the water. Granted, that could have been purely coincidental, but we also received an EVP at the same time of a woman, I believe it was, saying oops. So we're not sure if that was coinciding with the splash, with the conversation we were having. Maybe a ghost just dropped their keys, we're not really sure. But it was very interesting that all of these things happened in such quick succession, and around the same time that we were having the conversation about people's demise in this building, and on the property.
Yeah, I agree. It was extremely coincidental that night. It makes you wonder if how much was related to the incidents that we were talking about at that time.
I'm gonna briefly Lily Madison and the Ice Skaters. Gilbert Keller, sorry, should have edited this down. Caleb Anthony was hit by a mail train on the tracks behind the pump house. I don't have the year for that. He was a train employee. There was a person beheaded by a train in 1909. These train tracks back there have been there for 200 years. A lot of people don't know that. This has been an active train route for many years. And if you fell from a certain direction, your head would go on the rail and the train would sever. So I've actually seen several accounts of that in Richmond. There was another person that fell from a train and died in 1908. Swimmer drowns near the pump house 1929. Another swimmer drowned 1914. Alexander Krauss was a hitchhiker train rider. He jumped when he saw the police and his head was cut off. William Fuqua, I can't pronounce that right. Another person fell through the ice while ice skating in February 1998. There was G.A. Khan, who died on the 22nd of April 1896. Shot himself on a bench in the park near the reservoir. His body was just found on the bench with the gunshot and everything. There was also John Huddleston, who was 75 years old, a Confederate veteran living at the Soldiers' Home. We know now that there's a lot of evidence that Confederate soldiers were suffering from PTSD. The study was in its infancy then, but there's plenty of evidence now to support that. I think Steve's going to go into some of the equipment now.
Yeah, so we can briefly, and again, I'm more of a, get up and get interactive. So if you wanna wrap us up, and then folks can come up here and check out some of the equipment. That works.
Thank you so much for joining this panel. I've been dying to do a full presentation on the pump house ever since Dark Waters, because I only tell one story about it in that. I was like, there's so much here, it needs a full presentation. Catch me lecturing on this on future dates. I love you guys.
Yeah. Thank you guys for
Thank
joining
you so
us.
much.